Hi there, it's Scott Nicholson, Associate Professor at Syracuse University's School of Information Studies. And I'm here on Friday, and we're going to be talking about the social game experience. Now, all week we've been going through different types of game experiences. And today we're going to tie it up by looking at games that focus more upon the social interactions between players and between the people. Now, this is going to be different than games that have social interactions between characters within the game. So we talked about role-playing games yesterday. And there's a difference between me interacting with you when you are Zoldar the elf princess and me interacting with you when you are Bob the plumber who lives down the street. And so we're going to talk about today games that have you interacting with other people as who they are as compared to who the character they're playing is. So I'm not going to look at you as Colonel Mustard or Blue or Player 3 or as Zoldar the elf princess. I'm going to look at you as Bob. Hey, Bob. And so if the library's goal is to create themselves as a community hub, then you're going to want to include some of these game experiences because you want to create situations where people have a chance to get to know each other instead of just getting to know the characters the other people are playing. Now, I should say, all these games we've talked about can have social elements. They can have opportunities for people to get to know each other, either during the game or after the game. Games that are more intense and more involved are much less likely to encourage and facilitate social interaction. So for example, two people playing Go. Go is a very intense game. They're probably not going to be chatting about who they are and what they do for a living and things like that. On the other hand, some people playing something very light, like tumbling dice that we showed earlier, or sorry sliders, there's a much higher chance they're going to be chatting when it's not their turn. So if you want to have an opportunity for people to have more social interactions during the playing of the game, then you want to choose games that are less complex. Also, after a game, people can talk with each other, and that's always going to be available. But let's talk a little bit about some games that encourage the social interaction between players. So let's get into the main category of this type of game, and that's party games. So a lot of party games allow you to be yourself and to interact as yourself. You probably know things like charades. In charades, well, you're acting silly, but you're really showing some of yourself as you're playing. The old game Scruples comes to mind. In Scruples, people are talking about how they would react to a situation that's questionable, and people will then discuss their reaction. One game that's fairly well known is Apples to Apples. Apples to Apples is a very clever word game. You can get this one at Target and other department stores. With Apples to Apples, one player plays a noun and everyone else plays descriptive words, and you're trying to play the best descriptive word to that noun such that the player whose turn it is going to pick which answer they like the best. And so it's a social game because you're trying to do something that that player is going to like. I talked about Wits and Wagers earlier with knowledge games. Well, Wits and Wagers is also a social game because you're going to be placing your wagers on the answers that other people gave. So you're thinking about, well, what is it that person knows? And that's the social game element. The folks who did Wits and Wagers did another game that's purely social called Say Anything. And in Say Anything, what someone's going to do is read a question, and everyone's going to write down the answer to that question that they think the reader will pick. And then the reader picks one, and you get to see if you are able to guess what the reader's going to pick. I covered Say Anything on Board Games with Scott right here. Another game is Gifttrap. And Gifttrap is a game about giving gifts and receiving gifts. And what you're trying to do in Gifttrap is, out of a set of gifts, you're going to choose who you'd give which gift to. And then you're going to choose which gifts you would like, and then you're going to see if those things match. And so you're going to win the game if you're able to give people the gifts that they want the most. Again, this is a social game because it's all about getting to know someone. I did an episode about Gifttrap here at Board Games with Scott. Now, a really cool little party strategy game that it's really about social is called Cocker-Locken Poker, Cockroach Poker. It's a very simple game. You're going to have a hand of animals, and what you're going to do is you're going to slide someone a card and tell them what the animal is. That person's got to guess if they think you're telling the truth or bluffing. And if they think you are bluffing, then they're going to look at the card and they're going to pass it to someone else and tell them what the animal is. And that person's going to guess if that person's telling the truth or bluffing, and so on around the table. And it's purely about bluffing. It's all about reading other people. Another game along these lines is Liar's Dice. Liar's Dice, or Perudo, is about rolling dice and trying to predict what other people have. And you're going to be pushing them up higher and higher in bidding until someone finally calls the bluff and we see who won the bluff. So these bluffing games are actually also social games because they're about someone's ability to bluff and fool others. There are other elements in strategy games that are social elements. One of them is bidding. Whenever you have a game and people are bidding on something up and up, many times that comes to a game of brinksmanship. How far can you push the other person? How well can you read them? How well can you tell by their body language if they're going to continue to bidding, or if you're just going to bid them up as high as you can, then get out right at the last minute? Another element is negotiation, and so games that have a lot of negotiation. Chinatown, for example, is a negotiating game, and you can trade anything for anything in the game. While there is strategy, there's also a lot of social interaction that's going on between the players and their negotiating skills in the game. Now, I'm going to talk about a strategy conflict game here that has probably broken up more friendships than any other game out there, and that is diplomacy. Many of you probably groaned when I showed you this. Diplomacy is a conflict game where multiple people are fighting over terrain, and the trick with diplomacy is there's no dice involved. The only way to win a battle is to outnumber the other person, either by yourself or with alliances. And much of the game is spent negotiating with other people. And anyone that's played diplomacy knows that people get personally engaged with this type of game, with the negotiation. So there's actually social interaction going on between the individuals. I know people say, don't take it with you. It's only a game. Don't take it personally. But the fact is, people do. So that's something to know before you bring in something like diplomacy, which can get very, very nasty and can really upset people, is that people can take that with them out of a game. So you need to think about that in a social game experience too. A number of the big games and alternate reality games and things like that can have social elements. Some of them put you in the role of another character, and others don't. Others just have you as yourself. In fact, that's part of what the alternate reality game concept is that you are yourself in your real world, and all of a sudden you stumble across this whole different game space, and you're going to go explore it. And you're playing yourself through those games, and those games can really get people getting to know each other. They can have a lot of social elements in them. Now let's talk a little bit about video games and computer games. So these games don't tend to have a lot of social interaction available. Now, some of them do. For example, World of Warcraft and other massively multiplayer online games, because you're visiting the same world a lot of times, you get to know a lot of people. In fact, there's a Libraries and Librarians Guild on World of Warcraft. It's right here. I'm actually a member. And so there's a lot of social interaction that goes on between us as people. Even though we are out there slaying monsters together, we're chatting about, hey, did you hear what happened with OCLC? Things like that. And so it's actually the social interactions between people is what a lot of people play these games for. Now the question is, can you capture that in a library setting? With your idea, if your goal is to get people in your local library to work with each other, can you create a situation where people are going to interact? Now, any sort of game where you have a number of people together, playing together, creates the opportunity for social interaction, but some games are better than others. Things like Rock Band and Guitar Hero are actually great for getting people to engage with each other, because in those games you're working together as a team, and especially in Rock Band, where you're trying to perform as a group the best you can, and many times your group score will then be compared against other group score. That's different than something like Guitar Hero or Dance Dance Revolution, and in those games where you're playing against someone else. So games that have a cooperative mode are more likely to get people to engage with each other socially than games that have people fighting head-to-head, at least during the game. Afterwards, they may continue to talk, but during the game, not so much. Now, Wii games actually are more social than anything else, and that's true for any of the games that use the Wii as a waving remote. Things like Wii Sports and Mario Party and all these silly games that I talked about a little bit earlier with action games are also more social games. Things like Wii Bowling. If you've played these games, you know that the controls are just not that accurate. It's more about the social experience you're having with other people. Something like Wii Music, which doesn't even score how well you did, is all about making music together. It's about engaging with each other. And so many of the Wii games I see more as social games, because that's what they're going to facilitate, are social interactions. And that's what I see happen. I see people have social interactions surrounding one of these less intense Wii games where you're not tied to doing really, really well in order to have a good time. You can wave the controller in the general direction and stuff will happen and you can have fun. Now there's a very clever PlayStation 3 game that you may have heard of called Little Big Planet. And Little Big Planet players are working together to explore levels. And so it is also a social game. And in fact, there's this whole social network that's surrounded Little Big Planet. The people can create levels, and you can go and explore levels with each other. And if you have Little Big Planet and 4 controllers, it's a really great social experience for people to interact together. It's not about heavy competition, even though the game does keep score. It's really about working together to work your way through these levels. And because it's not a difficult game, and it's kind of hard to control, it's not about precise gameplay, so you can relax and have some fun. So there are a lot of other social light games that are out there that can engage these social experiences. There's another category of social games that you might want to consider, and those are the casino-style games. Things like bingo and poker and blackjack. These are games that you could bring into your library and run it not for money, but just for fun. You know, I know some libraries have done bingo for books and things like that, but you have to be careful if that infringes upon any local gambling rules. But these games are very much social games. Now, poker is a social game on a couple levels. One, it can be treated like a light social game, but second, really the gameplay of poker is about reading the other person. It's about getting engaged and into their head and understanding what is it they're trying to do and what's really going on with them. And so when you're running a poker game, you're actually running a very social interaction game where people are working with each other. But a bingo night, a poker night, a blackjack night, a library casino night where you come in, you get so many chips to play with, that can be a very social experience, a way to market your other gaming activities and bring in a very different clientele into the library. And then there's homebrew games. You can create a lot of different types of experiences to get to know each other. There's lots of icebreaker games. There's books out there on icebreaker activities. I have a lot of these books, and I use them as large group activities to get people to get to know each other. You could buy books of icebreakers, and I suggest those are nice events to do in the middle of some sort of big gaming event where you stop everything, you pause all the games, you bring everyone together for a large icebreaker activity where they're actually getting to know each other. Looking for those social experiences, these are going to be the types of games where when you want to build yourself as a community hub, which is one of the top library goals, you want to turn to games that enable the social experience. So throughout this week, we've talked about knowledge games, we've talked about strategy games, we've talked about action games, narrative games, and social games. And the idea is that you're going to select a game experience. And this game experience you're going to select based upon the goals for the gaming program. Some of the most common goals for gaming programs are that you want to draw in new people to the library, you want to provide a community hub, or you want to provide an additional service for a group that's already here. So you figure out which of these you're going for, or something else, and there's a long list that people actually go for. Now these need to be related to your library's goals, and so you actually start with the goals of the library, and from that you create the goals of the gaming program. Then you can select, well, which of these 5 gaming archetypes do I want to try and support? And once you have that, you can pick specific games. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the variable overlays that go into actually selecting the games and talk about some of the outcomes of the games. We're also going to talk about assessment of these games and marketing and some of the nuts and bolts of actually putting all of this stuff together into a gaming program. But I think this has been a heavy week. This has probably been the most involved week of the class as far as a lot of suggestions. And if you liked this week of the class, I'll suggest that you take a look for my book, which should be out early 2010, Everyone Plays at the Library, published by Information Today, because that's really where I'm going to explore each of these 5 a lot more in depth. But if you'll excuse me, I've got a social game to play myself, and maybe I can find a friend or two, and have a great weekend. So take care, and I'll see you all on Monday. Bye-bye.